Sudzha, come on, drive in. Russian troops filmed themselves entering the main town in Kursk today. It may be a ruin, but that's not the point. Kursk was Ukraine's bargaining chip in any future negotiations, the little bit of Russia they had seized and held as leverage. Now the Russians have taken it back, killing and capturing Ukrainian soldiers. A Russian soldier climbed the communication tower in Sudzha to fly the Russian and regimental flags. They're winning here. So there is no advantage to Russia in agreeing to the 30-day unconditional ceasefire proposed by the US and Ukraine. Appearing alongside President Lukashenko of Belarus, the Russian leader prevaricated.
So the idea itself is correct, and we certainly support it. But there are issues that we need to discuss, and I think that we need to discuss them with our American colleagues and partners. Maybe I will call President Trump and we'll discuss it together. But overall, we support the idea to end the conflict by peaceful means.
Ukraine, he suggested, might use a truce to their advantage.
How will they use these 30 days? Will they continue compulsory mobilization in Ukraine to supply weapons, to train the newly mobilized troops?
Here in Kyiv, I spoke to a member of the Ukrainian team which negotiated with the Americans in Jeddah. What President Putin is saying is, we want a long-lasting peace, and this 30-day ceasefire, that just benefits Ukraine and not Russia.
But if you want just and lasting peace, you have to start with something, obviously. I mean, you cannot just have just and lasting peace out of a sudden. Just and lasting peace is a process of negotiations, talks, teams are working or whatever. But if you want to stop deaths, you start, obviously, from truce.
The Russians aren't ready for a truce, are they?
We will see.
But what's the Ukrainian message to Russia now? You and the Americans have come up with this proposal. The Russians are being negative. What next?
If the Russians are being negative, we will accommodate or adjust our tactics, our strategy and tactics, together with our US partners. From now on, we are acting together and coordinating all our positions.
Yesterday, unusually, Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief Putin visited Kursk to be briefed by his Chief of Staff, General Gerasimov. He's a wartime leader now, and nothing he has said today suggests that his friend Donald Trump has persuaded him otherwise. Well, what President Putin said today, and we have just lost power here in Kyiv, but I will carry on talking even though I know it's dark, as it is for so many Ukrainians. President Putin, what he said is exactly what most Ukrainians I've spoken to expected, because they knew he would not agree to this. But what they wanted was to be in lockstep with the Americans, and that they are again. The question is, can a phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin change all that? We know that they can undo all of the work that the diplomats have done. What is absolutely clear is that, contrary to what President Trump has said in the past, this is not going to be easy or quick.
Lindsay Hilson in Kyiv. Well, joining me now from the Latvian capital, Riga, is the former Russian Prime Minister and now Putin critic, Mikhail Kasyanov. Is this a case of when yes means no?
In fact, yes, I agree with the Ukrainians' opinion that was not surprised that Putin, in fact, rejected this unconditional ceasefire. He is not interested in this particular period of time. He's not interested in ceasefire. He wants just talks with Donald Trump. He doesn't want to offend him. That's why he's saying he agrees with the unconditional, with the ceasefire, but conditional. That's what Mr. Trump should react on that, because it is evident that Putin doesn't want ceasefire. He just wants further concessions on the Ukrainian side and just expecting that Ukraine sooner or later would capitulate.
Is this what happens when he doesn't feel under pressure? I mean, obviously, lots of people feel Donald Trump has given away an awful lot up front, and there isn't a lot of pressure on Putin right now.
Yeah, Mr. Trump made a lot of statements which played in favor of Putin. Putin believes that he will be pulled out of isolation, and he wants to sit down with Donald Trump, not with Zelensky, but with President Trump, and to discuss and decide on the fate of the world. Not just, he doesn't want to be seen as part of the conflict. He wants to be seen as a world leader discussing just the fate of the world and discussing just the new architecture of security, European security. That's what Putin's desire, but he's not interested right now. Just pressure on him could be arranged, further pressure, and Great Britain and the European Union, they are prepared to create further pressure on Putin. Just in 6, 7, 8, 10 months, Putin will be in completely different position if just sanctions and pressure on him continues.
Well, haven't you been saying that for 3 years?
Exactly, but I'm saying this for 3 years, that all those sanctions which were exposed, just they were on a middle-term effect. Right now, after 3 years, just they had a cumulative effect. Only right now they started to work. Just only one part of sanctions, which was the oil price cap, just get an immediate effect when in 1993, just within first quarter of the year, Putin lost just half of revenue. But then just a gray fleet, shadow fleet, just overcome these problems. And right now, just another time, just to have a second round of sanctions, just to continue this pressure.
I mean, the reality is that Europe and America will have to address Putin's agenda, and that will include everything from whether Ukraine should have an army, to whether it's really a sovereign state, to whether it should have any ambitions to join the European Union, and whether NATO's expansion in the 90s was a mistake. I mean, this is a massive turnaround in the world's conversation around East-West geopolitics.
I don't think just the West, excluding maybe just Donald Trump at this particular moment, I don't think the West is prepared to accept any of those conditions, because just I think this is already clear. There was a permanent, continuous support of Ukraine just as a sovereign state, and all European leaders continue to believe that Ukraine should dream about reestablishing territorial integrity in the future, not as Mr. Zelensky says, not by military means, but diplomatic means. That's the issue. Sovereign Ukraine, that's the goal. The territorial integrity, that's the goal, just absolutely clear. That's why military support, financial support of Ukraine is so crucial right now.
So how do you think this plays out? How long can Putin draw out the process where he appears to be cooperating?
That's exactly. Putin is dragging out time and will be saying nice word to Mr. Trump, expecting that President Trump will take the position of him. So that's remember the recent statements of Donald Trump, who for many already considered to be just on the aggressor side rather than on the victim side. But he wants to be a neutral player. Right now, he has such an opportunity to be a neutral player. Putin doesn't want just to be under pressure of someone. That's what now just Mr. Trump should react on this. In fact, rejection of Putin's rejection of ceasefire proposal, because just any negotiation on a future peace plan, peace agreement starts with the ceasefire. That's what obvious for everyone. That's what Mr. Trump should react on that.
Do you feel Vladimir Putin is winning right now?
He is moving step by step. He believes just within few months the situation would change in his favor, because just Ukraine facing with the problems. But that's the issue of NATO states again to increase even support. 2 days ago they unfrozen the military support and exchange of intelligence information, which was absolutely necessary for Ukraine. And right now that's the time to make decisions to further support of Ukraine, because just Ukraine should survive. European Union is prepared, together with Great Britain, is prepared to partially replace American support, but it's impossible to make it just immediately overnight. That's why just the US role is crucial at this particular moment, and everything just should be understandable for Trump's administration. I think that decision will be made in favor of Ukraine, just to let them survive.
Mikhail Kasyanov, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, in a press conference with the NATO chief, Donald Trump said he hoped Russia would do the right thing, declaring that he would love to meet Putin and get it over with fast. Let's go to our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, who's in Washington.
Yes, the heartening news for NATO, at least, is that Mark Rutte, as Secretary General, and Donald Trump go back a long way. They know each other, they respect each other, and that quite genuinely came across. So that's good news for the alliance. If there are anxieties that in some way Donald Trump might want to walk away from it all. Your remarks you just made there about Russia pretty much sum it up. It appeared the president didn't really know much about how things may have developed with Moscow, save only this. He left off the subject with a slight warning, keeping the ball firmly in Moscow's court, saying it'll be very disappointing for the world should Moscow reject this proposed 30-day ceasefire. There was always going to be an awkward moment, and of course it came, predictably enough, on Greenland. Just moments after the Secretary General had said, whoa, NATO's not going to get involved in Donald Trump's plans to, in some way, annex Greenland, the President of the United States said this.
We really need it for national security. I think that's why NATO might have to get involved in a way, because we really need Greenland for national security. It's very important. You know, we have a couple of bases on Greenland already, and we have quite a few soldiers, and maybe you'll see more and more soldiers go there. I don't know.
Extraordinary comments, sitting just 5 feet from the Secretary General of NATO, talking about the United States potentially simply seizing a large landmass belonging to a fellow NATO member. Extraordinary times.
Just while we have you, Alex, another eye-watering threat of a new tariff.
Yes, every day a new tariff. It's blah, blah, it's noise, it's bluster. Of course, at the moment, threatening 200% tariffs on European wines and champagnes coming into the United States. As ever, check against delivery, but right now, check against the markets. This morning, the Dow Jones has gone down 1.3, the S&P down 500 points. This really matters on Wall Street. This morning, a new opinion poll says that the economic handling, the ratings of Donald Trump's economic handling of the US economy, the worst in this administration and the previous administration. Plenty of press reports suggesting that senior Republican figures are having quiet and perhaps increasingly less quiet words in the ear of the president, saying, Mr. President, you can't continue this obsession with tariffs. It's damaging the world economy. More importantly, it is damaging our economy. Right now, Donald Trump seems immovable. Donald Trump so often seems immovable, though, just before he moves.
Alex Thompson in Washington. So what pressure can the West exert if President Putin continues to insist on his terms only for an end to the Ukraine war? Well, with me now is Stephanie Baker, who's a specialist in how economic sanctions have affected Russia. Thank you for joining us. It's tempting to think they haven't affected Russia that much because they're still going.
They're still going. I think it's a mistake to think that they haven't affected Russia deeply. The sanctions have cost Russia hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's why Putin wants them lifted. Let's face it, if they weren't having any effect, he wouldn't be demanding that all sanctions be lifted, which is exactly what Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman, said today. They could go further, there's no doubt about that, particularly on Russian oil, which is its principal source of revenue. Oil is key here. It's always been the linchpin of the Russian economy, going back decades, going back to the late 80s in the Soviet period. It weakened the Soviet economy. It hobbled Boris Yeltsin's reforms in the 1990s because the price of oil was low. And there had been reluctance in the Biden administration to go hard on Russian oil because of concern about higher prices in the West.
I mean, given China and India are going to keep buying Russian oil, what could you actually do about Russian oil?
You could sanction a lot more of these rusty oil tankers that they use to avoid this price cap, this restriction on using Western insurance for tankers to transport Russian oil. You could hit some of the big major Russian oil producers with full blocking sanctions. And that would effectively be taking a lot of Russian oil off the market. I think that would make Chinese and Indian refineries and ports think twice about accepting those tankers if it was accepting tankers that were sanctioned or carrying oil that came from, state-controlled Rosneft, for instance. So there is further that they can go, but that does entail costs to Western economies. That could cause a price spike in oil.
So when Donald Trump says, he could hit him really, really hard, A, is that a real threat? And B, what else would it involve?
I don't think he's looked at the sanctions that are in place right now very carefully. He said he'd hit the Russian banking sector very hard. The Russian banking sector is widely sanctioned. They had provided licenses for many banks to allow them to facilitate payments for energy. And actually, the Trump administration has just recently curtailed those licenses for Russian banks. They could go a lot farther on that. There are other ways that they could hit Russian energy, going after oil traders that are facilitating that to really shut down Russian oil trade.
I suppose in the near term, it's more likely that Europe would introduce extra sanctions. There's been an awful lot of talk recently around the frozen Russian assets. How much of a Trump card, if you'll pardon the pun, are the frozen Russian assets?
It's a big issue. It is the Trump card that Europe holds. However, Europe remains divided on sanctions. For instance, Hungary's Viktor Orban has just said that he's threatening to withhold or not renew EU sanctions against 2,000 Russian individuals unless they lift sanctions on this one Russian oligarch. So he has always been the bugbear in the EU sanctions policy and could frustrate whatever renewal of EU sanctions goes ahead.
But would it be legal to just seize the assets and take them?
Many lawyers believe that it would be legal, with certain restrictions, that it wouldn't necessarily be legal. There are questions about whether or not that money could be used for weapons. Could it be used for budget support for Ukraine? The money is fungible. It could be used to replace just the pure financial aid that Europe is providing to Ukraine. But Europe has divided on this issue. France and Germany have been opposed to this for years. The U.S., under the Biden administration, actually agreed to do this, to seize the underlying assets. Canada has been supportive. David Cameron, when he was foreign secretary, he was supportive of it. But it was divisions in Europe that really prevented it. But the lion's share of those assets, about 200 billion euros, are in Europe, denominated in euros, and so that really holds the key. And given the budget constraints that European governments are facing, I think it's inevitable that they're going to have to figure out a way to go ahead with this. The European Central Bank chief, Christine Lagarde, has been opposed to it, but you're seeing movement and some noise from certain corners of Europe more supportive.
Stephanie Baker, thank you very much indeed.